And welcome to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. Today on the Jazz Update, Bobby Hutcherson, an iconic vibraphonist and composer who revolutionized jazz in the latter 20th century with his compositions and playing. During his tenure with Blue Note Records, he recorded over 250 albums. Many of his songs have become jazz classics today, like Little B's poem, Bouquet, Components, Montara, and others. He started out playing in Bay Area in the 60s, went on to collaborate with saxophonist Harold Land and pianist McCoy Tyner. Together they released a series of successful albums. In 2010, Bobby was awarded the NEA Jazz Masters Award from the National Endowment for the Arts. He was also one of the founders of the jazz band the SF Jazz Collective. So that was a quick insight into Bobby Hutcherson, and on this week's episode of the Jazz Update, it's all about Bobby Hutcherson, his life and times and best albums. Also coming up, some trending festival and album news. Stay tuned to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva to find out more. We'll be right back after some music. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. Today on the Jazz Update, Bobby Hutcherson, his life and times and best albums. During this hour, we're going to be talking about his biography. Bobby Hutcherson was an outstanding vibraphone and marimba player. He grew up being inspired by Art Blakey records. Also, many of his family were into music. He started out playing in Gerald Wilson's jazz orchestra in his hometown. At an early age, he started out playing the vibraphone after being inspired by a Milt Jackson classic called Bemsha Swing that he'd heard during a live concert performance. He took up music full-time in his teens, touring alongside jazz greats like Eric Dolphy and Charles Lloyd. He then started touring with the Billy Michel Al Grey Group in New York. He entered the jazz music arena full-time alongside Herbie Lewis a few years later. Lewis would host jam sessions at his apartment. After watching Hutcherson play during one of his events, he invited Hutcherson to tour alongside him. His debut album, The Kicker, was released on Blue Note Records in 1963. Although it wasn't released until nearly 40 years later, the album demonstrated his prowess in hard bop and blues. In 1966, he made another notable album, Stick Up, featuring several jazz legends at the time, McCoy Tyner, Joe Henderson, and others. In 1971, he was awarded the world's best vibist title in the International Jazz Critics Poll. The same year, saxophonist Harold Land joined his ensemble. They would tour and perform alongside pianists like Chick Corea, Stanley Cowell, and Joe Sample on drums. Some of their best album releases included Dialogue, Happenings, Total Eclipse, San Francisco, and more. He has the record for the second longest tenure with Blue Note Records, 1963 to 77, second only to Horace Silver's record. He went on to record for Columbia Records in the late 1970s, also for Landmark Records in the 80s. In 2004, Hutcherson founded the SF Jazz Collective, a band that comprised musicians like Joshua Redman, Miguel Zenon, Nicholas Payton, and others. He toured with them for several years. In 2010, he was awarded the Lifetime Jazz Master Fellowship Award from the National Endowment for the Arts. He died in 2007, leaving behind a legacy as a great improviser and one of the greatest vibraphonists in jazz. So that was a bit of insight into the biography of Bobby Hutcherson, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, Bobby Hutcherson, his life and times and best albums. And now for some festival news. The John Coltrane International Jazz Festival is just around the corner. John Coltrane was one of the greatest band leaders, saxophonists and composers in jazz. He's collaborated with several jazz legends, from Miles Davis to Thelonious Monk, and inspired generations of jazz artists to come. So this festival is a tribute to the great John Coltrane. It's held every year in his hometown in California. This year it's taking place in Oak Hollow Park from August 31st to September 1st. There's also various festivities leading up to that event. This year's festival features some great names from the lineup. Gregory Porter, whose performances feature jazz, gospel, blues and soul. There's Brian Culbertson, who's produced more than 40 Billboard chart-topping hits. For more information, please visit coltranejazzfest.com. So that was some festival news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. We're going for a short break. We'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about some of Bobby Hutcherson's best albums of all time. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan Silva. On this week's episode, Bobby Hutcherson, his life and times and best albums. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first one's called The Kicker. This album was Hutcherson's debut on Blue Note Records, features compositions from the band members, from beautiful ballads to fast-paced swingers. Dialogue is the next album. This album was also instrumental in shaping avant-garde and post-pop jazz at the time. The album mainly contains original compositions by the band members. Components, Hutcherson's second album for Blue Note Records. One of the standout compositions here is the track Little B's Poem. This one's Bobby Hutcherson's best-loved composition. Happenings, another outstanding album featuring a great lineup. Also, there's a diverse range of moods evoked by the music. and Natural Illusions, a great album full of jazz classics reworked by Hutcherson. Overall a blend of traditional jazz and fusion. So that was a quick recap of everything that we are going to be discussing during this hour, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. Stay tuned. And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Bobby Hutcherson, his life and times and best albums. During this hour, we're going to be talking about some of his best albums of all time. The first one's called The Kicker. This is one of Hutcherson's best albums. Most of the songs are compositions by tenor saxophonist Joe Henderson. There's Mirror, a reflective ballad full of emotion, and For Duke P, a fast-paced swinging song. Also, this record was originally intended to be Hutcherson's debut record on Blue Note Records, but like a lot of other jazz albums released on Blue Note Records at the time, it was not released until nearly 40 years later. Dialogue is the next album. This was one of the best albums by Bobby Hutcherson and one of his early hits. The album was also instrumental in shaping avant-garde and post-pop jazz at the time. It mainly contains original compositions by the band members. The album contains traditional influences, for example the opening track Kata, or bluesy soul jazz tracks like Ghetto Lights. So that trend runs throughout the album. The next album is called Components. This is Hutcherson's second album for Blue Note Records. Many of the tracks in the album are Hutcherson's own compositions. One of the standout compositions here is the track Little Beat's Poem. This one's Bobby Hutcherson's best loved composition. It was written as a tribute for his son. A beautiful lilting waltz that's both passionate and gentle. In addition to Bobby's vibraphone playing, the track also features great piano and saxophone solos. Today, this song is a jazz classic and one of Bobby's most popular tunes. There's Tranquility, a beautiful reflective ballad, and two rather unconventional hard bop songs, the title track and West 22nd Street theme. The second half of the album features mainly Joe Chambers' compositions. Joe Chambers was a frequent collaborator on Hutcherson's tracks, pieces like Juba Dance and Air, textured, evocative tracks. The next album is called Happenings, another outstanding album featuring a great lineup including Herbie Hancock, Joe Chambers and Bob Cranshaw. Hutcherson's prowess both as a composer and musician comes across here. He wrote most of the tunes with one exception. Also, there's a diverse range of moods evoked by the music. There's graceful up-tempo tunes like Aquarian Moon. There's also beautiful love ballads like Bouquet and When You're Near. The album ends on the track Omen, that's an avant-garde jazz piece. The next album is called Natural Illusions, a great album full of jazz classics reworked by Hutcherson. Billy Strayhorn's lush life plays out as a beautiful string instrumental piece here. A more powerful tune, Duke Ellington's Sophisticated Lady. There's also a chamber ballad by Hutcherson called When You Are Near. A funk fusion track by Jack DeJohnette called Groove Every Thursday. One of the standout tracks on the album. So this album is basically a blend of traditional jazz and fusion. So that was a quick insight into some of Bobby Hutcherson's best albums of all time, and this is the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. Here's Bobby Hutcherson with... And welcome back to the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. On this week's episode, Bobby Hutcherson, his life and times and best hits. Now it's time to talk about some trending festival news. The 3rd annual Boscott Jazz Festival is around the corner, featuring performances by the Brubeck brothers, Luke Franco, Peggy Stern and Samira Evans. The festival is taking place Saturday, August 17th from 4 to 8 p.m. in Pittsfield, Boscott ski area. The Brubeck brothers comprise of the legendary jazz pianist Dave Brubeck's sons Dan and Chris. Dan's on drums, Chris is on bass and trombone, while guitarist Mike D'Amico and pianist Chuck Lamb make it a quartet. The Brubeck brothers have toured and performed nationally and internationally, including at notable jazz festivals like the Monterey Jazz Festival. Samira Evans is a jazz legend hailing from New Orleans. She has toured America, Europe and Asia and collaborated with other jazz greats like James Brown, B.B. King and Charles Neville. And then there's the Luke Franco Quartet, a regular performance at venues across Berkshire. Luke Franco's toured alongside the Grammy-winning John Davis' concert jazz band in his time. And then there's Peggy Stern performing with her trio. She's a legendary performer who's been performing at jazz festivals for over 20 years. She was also the founder of the Wall Street Jazz Festival in New York. For more information, please visit boscottmountain.connectintouch.com. So that was some trending festival news on the Weekend Jazz Update with Jashan De Silva. We're going for a short break, we'll be right back after that. When we come back, we're going to be talking about more of Bobby Hutcherson's best albums of all time. Stay tuned.